Today on Long History Short, we're revealing the most disturbingly creative weapons ever used in ancient warfare. This is a countdown you won't forget. Kicking off our list at number 15, the Ōdachi, Japan's sword. Too big to sheathe. It was longer than a man's arm, too big to wear, too heavy to wield one-handed. And when it struck, it didn't cut a man down, it split him open. The Ōdachi, or great sword, wasn't a sidearm, it was a statement. Most swords were meant to be balanced, efficient, fast, practical. The Ōdachi was none of that. It stretched well over 3 feet in blade length, some even longer. The biggest were so massive, they had to be carried into battle on a servant's back, or drawn from a special bag, like you would with a spear. This wasn't elegance, it was extreme engineering. So why use a sword this big? The Ōdachi was born in the 14th century, when mounted warriors ruled the battlefield. And if you needed to strike down a horseman from the ground, you needed reach, you needed leverage, you needed a sword that could cut through horse and rider in one swing. It was used to intimidate as much as to kill. A samurai carrying an Ōdachi wasn't subtle. He was sending a message. I don't plan to dodge. I plan to destroy. But the Ōdachi's power didn't stop on the battlefield. It also became a symbol of sacred power. Some were never meant for combat. They were offering swords, forged for shrines, too massive to draw, polished by teams of artisans. It was said the longer the Ōdachi, the more powerful the god it honored. In this way, the sword became more than steel. It became a bridge between warrior and divine. By the time firearms entered the battlefield, the Ōdachi became obsolete, too heavy, too slow, too long for the tight quarters of castle warfare. But its legend lived on, in anime, video games, and martial arts folklore. The Ōdachi remains the ultimate blade, heroic, exaggerated, and unforgettable. It was never practical, but it wasn't supposed to be. The Ōdachi was a sword for stories, a weapon you didn't just carry, you became. From a sword too big for a scabbard to a weapon that whispered death from afar. Coming in at number 14, the Scythian Bow. You never saw them, just a whistle in the wind, then pain, a sting in the side, a gasp, then nothing. This wasn't just archery. This was stealth warfare on horseback. The Scythians were nomads, no castles, no cities, just riders, fields, and vengeance. They struck from nowhere, fast, precise, and impossible to catch. And at the heart of their terror was a weapon built for ambush and escape. The Scythian bow was a short, recurve bow, powerful despite its size. Its curves stored tension, releasing furious velocity in a compact shot. Unlike longer bows, it could be fired while riding at full gallop, in any direction. Front, side, backward. Yes, even backward while retreating. This wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about agility and fear. Scythian riders could fire dozens of arrows while circling their enemy, never stopping, never engaging hand to hand. They didn't fight fair. They didn't need to. And the arrows, sometimes poisoned, dipped in decaying animal matter or venom. One scratch didn't just kill you, it rotted you. The Greeks wrote of them in awe. The Persians tried to match them and failed. Even Rome feared their ghost tactics. You could train an army for years, but you couldn't train them to hit what they couldn't catch. Mounted, mobile, and trained from childhood, Scythian warriors were the original hit-and-run masters. Their bows became extensions of their bodies, firing with almost no pause. And when enemies thought they were retreating, they weren't. They were luring you in. One Scythian could fire 3 arrows before a Roman archer had loosed one. And from horseback, that arrow didn't just land. It arrived from nowhere, from arrows that struck from the shadows to a blade that changed the course of an empire in one fateful day. Coming in at number 13, the Pugio, Rome's smallest, deadliest blade. It was barely the length of a man's hand, but in that hand, it changed the course of history. It didn't slice through armor or cut down cavalry. It whispered behind cloaks, beneath togas, in backroom deals. And one day, it struck 23 times into the body of Julius Caesar. The Pugio wasn't just a knife, it betrayed. To the untrained eye, the Pugio looked ceremonial, like jewelry for the military elite. But in Rome, it was every soldier's sidearm. It sat on the hip of generals and foot soldiers alike. Short, double-edged, triangular, built for piercing in close quarters, where a sword was too long and a second too late. It wasn't made to swing, it was made to thrust. And once it was in, it didn't come out clean. March 15th, 44 BCE. A room full of senators, a lifetime of ambition, and a man named Caesar. He never saw it coming. The first stab, shock. The second, pain. By the 23rd, the greatest empire the world had ever known was forever changed. The Pugio was the weapon of Brutus and Cassius. It ended one man's reign, but ignited a civil war. And in doing so, it became more than a tool of war. It became a symbol of betrayal, of politics, of how power is never truly safe. Outside the Senate, the Pugio earned its reputation in the trenches. Romans fought tight, shoulder to shoulder. In those close ranks, the gladius got the glory. But it was the Pugio that finished the job. When a soldier went down, the Pugio went in. When armor held fast, the Pugio found the gaps. It was the last thing you saw, and the last thing you felt. Some Roman versions were inscribed, with oaths, with curses, with the name of the man it belonged to, and sometimes the name of the one it would be used on. From the dagger of assassination to a rapid-fire invention that redefined battlefield volume. Next up, at number 12, the Chinese repeating crossbow, the trigger of terror. One step too close, and thwick, 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 a flurry of bolts, tears through the air. No reload, no pause, just death on a loop. This wasn't a sniper's weapon. It was a storm in your hands. Most ancient weapons required rhythm, load, aim, fire, repeat. But this was chaos on command. With a single pump-action motion, the repeating crossbow could launch 10 bolts in under 15 seconds. Wooden, compact, and deadly at close range, it didn't wait for aim. It just fired, and fired, and fired again. Soldiers could clear a hallway, a doorway, a charge, without stopping to reload. No elegance, no mercy, just a mechanical hiss and a path of bodies. It was called the Zhuge Nu, named after the legendary strategist Zhuge Liang, though the design likely predated him. Still, the association stuck, because this wasn't just a weapon. It was a tactical advantage. Peasants with minimal training could defend palace walls. Guards could cut down ambushes before a blade got close. Some models were even dipped in poison, so a single scratch could turn into a slow, silent death. In the right hands, it was unstoppable. In the wrong ones, unpredictable, terrifying. Not accuracy, volume. The fear wasn't about one bolt hitting the heart. It was about 12 bolts flying at once. Fast, frantic, and wild. You might block one, you wouldn't block all. In confined spaces, hallways, alleys, gates, it didn't matter how good you were with a sword. If you were in range, you were already too late. While some weapons overwhelmed with speed, others harnessed the very elements. Our next entry, at number 11, Archimedes Heat Ray. Fire from the sun, no thunder, no metal, no smoke, just sunlight and death. Sailors blinked against the gleam, then screamed as flames licked up the rigging. Ships smoldered, wood cracked, and the sea itself shimmered with heat. This was the ancient death beam that may have turned the sun into a weapon. The setting, the siege of Syracuse, 212 BCE. Roman ships filled the harbor, closing in to capture the city. But Syracuse had a secret weapon, Archimedes, not a warrior, an inventor, not a soldier, a mind so advanced his defenses would baffle engineers for centuries. Among his rumored creations, a heat ray, a line of soldiers holding polished bronze shields or mirrors, angled to catch the Mediterranean sun, then focus it on a single point. The target? Enemy sails, oiled hulls, ropes strung like kindling, and one by one, Roman ships caught fire, ignited by sunlight alone. Could it work? Historians debate it. In the 1970s, a Greek scientist recreated the idea, and it worked at short distances. In 2005, Mythbusters put it to the test. They needed 300 mirrors, but managed to char wood. Not quite a death ray, but enough to make you wonder. Even if Archimedes didn't destroy a fleet, the psychological effect of mirrors catching the sun, a ship suddenly bursting into flame, and no visible attacker, that alone could rattle a navy. Whether or not it burned ships to cinders, the heat ray stands as a symbol, not of brute force, but of brilliance. A reminder that in war, the sharpest mind might be the deadliest weapon. Archimedes didn't wield a sword, he wielded geometry. From harnessing the sun's power to unleashing an explosive roar, at number 10, ancient China's thunder crash bomb. First came the hiss, then the roar, then the sky cracked open, and men vanished. Shields splintered, horses screamed, the air itself seemed to explode. This wasn't a god's wrath, it was a bomb made of iron, launched by hand. A weapon so advanced it sounded like it came from the future, and in a world that had never heard an explosion, it changed everything. The thunder crash bomb didn't just kill, it disoriented, it confused. It made seasoned soldiers drop their weapons and run. Inside was an early form of black powder, packed into a hollow iron shell, sealed tight and hurled into the sky. When it hit, it burst with a force that sent metal shards flying and morale plummeting. The bomb wasn't fired from a cannon. It was launched by trebuchets or slings, catapulted like a message from the gods. And that message was clear. You're not safe, even from afar. Imagine you're a soldier. You've fought with swords and arrows. Then suddenly, there's a sound like the sky tearing in half. No warning, no blade, just fire and fragments. Reports from the Song dynasty say entire formations dissolved into chaos. Horses bolted, men wept. Enemies weren't just wounded, they were shaken, because this wasn't just new tech, it was psychological warfare wrapped in steel. The thunder crash bomb predates handheld firearms. It arrived before cannons, but it paved the way for all of them. This was one of the first battlefield explosives in human history, and it worked. Used in real battles during the Mongol invasions, these bombs turned the tide more than once. Some versions even hissed as they flew, adding suspense to the terror. The Mongols were feared across continents, but this made them afraid. If the thunder crash bomb created chaos, our next weapon was chaos embodied. At number 9, the Urumi, the sword that whips and bleeds. At first it looks like a belt, then like a snake. But once it's unleashed, it sings through the air, not with a slice, but with a hiss, it wraps, it coils, it bites. The Urumi was a weapon so wild, so unpredictable, that even its wielder risked being cut to ribbons. Because this wasn't a sword you held, it was one you survived. The Urumi comes from southern India. It's a blade, yes, but not like any other. Imagine a sword made from a strip of flexible steel, up to 5 feet long, razor sharp from end to end. Now imagine multiple strips, sometimes 4 or 5, attached to a single hilt. When wielded, the Urumi isn't aimed, it's unleashed. It curves through the air like a whip. It can strike from above, below, behind, simultaneously. And in skilled hands, it turns the very concept of combat into a blur of spinning death. But here's the twist. The Urumi doesn't just endanger the enemy, it endangers the one holding it. Training took years. Missteps were punished with torn skin, or worse. To master the Urumi, warriors had to learn not just the weapon, but the rhythm of battle. It was a dance, a performance, where every swing had to be felt, not just executed. And in close combat, forget shields, forget parries. The Urumi slipped past all of it. You couldn't predict its path. You could only hear the whir and pray it didn't end on you. So, why make something so dangerous? Because in the tight spaces of a battlefield, where numbers meant everything, the Urumi gave a single fighter the reach of 5. One person could clear a circle around themselves, cutting down multiple opponents before they ever got close. And if the wielder moved fast enough, the blades stayed extended by sheer momentum, slicing anything they touched. Masters of the Urumi were said to be untouchable. In the Kalaripayattu tradition, the ancient martial art where the Urumi was born, these swords weren't just weapons. They were a rite of passage. Only the most disciplined, the most fluid, and the most fearless ever graduated to wield one. Because you weren't just fighting with steel, you were fighting with something that acted like it had a mind of its own. From unpredictable whips of steel to whirling engines of pure, unadulterated terror. Our next entry at number 8, the Scythed Chariot. First, you hear the thunder, hooves pounding the earth like war drums. Then a scream, sharp, sudden, cut short. Because what just passed wasn't a chariot. It was a blade with wheels. The wheels didn't just roll, they spun. And jutting from them were curved steel scythes, arms of death slicing through men like wheat. The ancient war machine that didn't just charge into battle, it harvested it. Used by the Persians, the Seleucids, and even the Britons against Rome, the Scythed Chariot wasn't about subtlety, it was about spectacle. A two-wheeled platform pulled by horses at full speed, with sharpened blades protruding from the axles, designed to cut, maim, and scatter. Infantry lines. They weren't broken, they were shredded. These weren't weapons of precision, they were weapons of panic. And that was the point. Scythed chariots weren't used to hold ground. They were shock weapons, sent straight into the densest parts of an enemy formation to cause confusion, cut down soldiers, and turn order into chaos. Once the charge began, there was no stopping it. If the horses stayed on course, bodies fell in rows. If they panicked, the chariot didn't care who it cut, friend, foe, or field commander. At the Battle of Gaugamela, in 331 BCE, the Persians unleashed scythed chariots against Alexander the Great. But Alexander, always a step ahead, opened lanes in his ranks, letting the chariots pass harmlessly through. Then he attacked from the sides. It was genius, and it was the beginning of the end for the weapon. Scythed chariots were terrifying until they weren't. Once armies adapted, once they learned to move, part, or spike the ground in preparation, the shock faded, and a weapon built on surprise lost its edge. But for a time, the sight of a scythed chariot racing toward you, blades glinting in the sun, horses frothing at the mouth. That was enough to shake even the bravest soldier, because you couldn't block it, you couldn't outrun it, you could only hope it missed. From the brutal motion of scythed chariots, we turned to a weapon that focused that terror into a single devastating strike. At number 7, the Khopesh, Egypt's crescent of carnage. It didn't slash, it ripped. The edge curved, caught the ribs, and pulled sideways. One jerk of the arm, and the enemy's shield flew left, their torso exposed, just in time for the second swing to land deep in the gut. Blood didn't pour. It slid, down bronze curves designed to hook, tear, and leave a man screaming in the sand. This Egyptian weapon didn't just kill, it humiliated. Before there were broadswords or long swords, the Egyptians forged this curved blade, part sword, part sickle, all violence. Unlike a straight blade, the Khopesh was built to bend around your defenses. If you blocked it, it caught your shield. If you ran, it hooked your legs. If you stood still, you lost something. But the terror wasn't just in the damage, it was in who carried it. Ramses II, one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, was famously depicted holding a Khopesh. And when a pharaoh poses with a weapon, it wasn't just for show. It was propaganda in steel. Look what I can do to you. The Khopesh became sacred, buried in tombs, placed in the hands of gods, displayed like a relic of divine force. To hold one was to hold command. To face one, that was something else entirely. The Khopesh was designed to do 3 things: disarm the enemy, leave them bleeding, leave them terrified. The curved shape wasn't just clever, it was brutal. Unlike straight swords that glanced off armor, the Khopesh grabbed and tore through it, and its short length made it perfect for in-your-face combat, where there was no room for hesitation and no mercy. You couldn't block it, you couldn't predict it, you could only hope you weren't the one it hooked. From the devastating curves of the Khopesh, we turned to a weapon that truly broke ground and empires. At number 6, the Basilica Cannon, the gun that broke an empire. The earth shook, not from hooves, not from drums, but from something deeper, something new. A thunderclap rolled across Constantinople, and then a flash, a blast so powerful it split stone like kindling. This weapon was so massive, so destructive. It didn't just fire on a city, it fired the opening shot of a new age. In 1453, the walls of Constantinople had stood for over 1,000 years. They had withstood Romans, Persians, Huns, invaders who came and failed. But then came Mehmed II, and with him, a weapon the world had never seen. Built by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, the Basilica was no ordinary cannon. It was 27 feet long, fired stone balls over 600 pounds, and it took 60 oxen just to move it. It wasn't a siege weapon, it was a statement. Each time it fired, it took hours to reload, but it didn't need speed. It had terror. The thunder of the shot could be heard miles away. Its projectiles flattened towers, punched through walls, and sent shockwaves through the hearts of defenders. Witnesses described stone balls the size of boulders crashing into ramparts, turning proud defenses into dust and dread. The walls that had stood for a millennium began to crack. But the Basilica wasn't just a tool of conquest. It was the symbol of a new era, where gunpowder eclipsed cavalry and cannons replaced castles. After Constantinople fell, the message was clear. No wall could protect you now. The age of medieval fortresses was ending, and the age of explosive power had begun. Still, this beast came with a price. It needed constant cooling, or it would crack. its barrel warped with repeated use, and just aiming it, adjusting by fractions, took entire teams of engineers. It wasn't nimble, it wasn't efficient, but it worked. And once it did, the city that had stood for 1,000 years fell in just 53 days, from cannons that crumbled stone to blades that turned battlefields into altars. Entering our top 5 at number 5, the Macuahuitl, the obsidian chainsaw. You don't hear it coming, just the wind. Then, snap, a sound like splintering bone, and suddenly, a riderless horse stumbles past, its neck a clean line, sliced open in one swing. That wasn't steel, that wasn't a sword. It was something far stranger and sharper. This weapon made conquistadors rethink everything they thought they knew about war. The Macuahuitl was the signature weapon of the Aztec Empire, a wooden paddle embedded with obsidian blades, sharp as razors, gleaming like black glass. To European invaders, it looked primitive, until they saw what it could do. Obsidian doesn't bend, it doesn't dull, it shatters. But until then, it cuts with a precision sharper than surgical steel. Eyewitnesses described warriors decapitating horses in a single blow. Spanish soldiers who survived Aztec ambushes spoke of wounds that didn't bleed at first. Because the cuts were so clean, the skin didn't even know it was open. But the Macuahuitl wasn't just about destruction. It was also about ritual. Aztec warriors didn't always kill immediately. Their goal? Capture, bleed, intimidate. In many cases, the Macuahuitl was used not to kill, but to injure and disarm, leaving enemies helpless for later sacrifice. Warfare to the Aztecs was both battle and offering, and their weapon of choice reflected that strange duality: beautiful, terrifying, and deeply spiritual. It wasn't just a club, it was a symbol of strength, sacrifice, and the razor-thin line between man and God. From blades of ritual horror to engines of pure, blunt force. Our next weapon rained death from a distance. At number 4, catapults, death from afar. It begins with silence, then a thunk, a jolt through the ground. You look up and there's a shadow overhead. It's not a bird, not a cloud. It's a 90-pound stone screaming through the air. And by the time you realize it, it's already too late. This was the ancient world's artillery cannon. Not just a tool of destruction, but a message launched from across the horizon. Catapults were terrifying, not just because of what they hit, but because you never saw them coming. Used by civilizations from Greece to Rome to China, catapults marked a turning point in warfare, when battles weren't just up close, but everywhere. Walls no longer protected you. Distance no longer kept you safe. Catapults hurled rocks, spears, flaming pitch, and, in the darkest moments, diseased corpses, intended to spread panic and plague. The power behind a catapult wasn't muscle, it was math. Roman engineers calculated angles, wind, weight. They used torsion, twisted ropes of sinew and hair to store and unleash devastating force. Some machines, like the ballista, fired bolts the size of telephone poles with pinpoint precision. Others, like the onager, kicked backward with such force they had to be wheeled into dirt trenches just to stay upright. The Romans didn't just invent war machines, they standardized them. 10 catapults per legion, always ready, always aimed at your city. But the real weapon wasn't the stone, it was the waiting. Sieges could last months, soldiers on the wall, never knowing when the next strike would hit. You'd hear the creak of ropes tightening, then silence, then crack. Sometimes it wasn't even aimed at you. It was aimed at the market, the temple, your home. It said, "We don't need to climb your walls. We'll break your spirit from the outside." If catapults broke wills from afar, our next weapon shattered formations up close, with thunderous living force. Stomping into number 3, war elephants, the thunder that walked. You hear them before you see them. A low rumble, the ground shaking, then the mist parts, and what's coming isn't a chariot or a cavalry charge. It's something bigger, taller than a house, covered in armor, dripping with war paint. A creature with eyes that don't blink, tusks like spears, and an entire archer squad on its back. The ancient world's most terrifying living weapon. In an age where the average soldier stood just over 5 feet tall, the arrival of a 6-ton elephant, armored and raging, was nothing short of divine terror. Used in warfare as early as the 4th century BCE, war elephants were the ancient world's equivalent of an armored tank, with muscle, fury, and intelligence. Civilizations from India, Persia, and later Carthage used them with devastating psychological effect. Imagine being in formation, shield up, sword ready, and suddenly the sun disappears behind a wall of gray flesh, tusks swinging. One swipe could crush a line. One misstep could end 50 lives. These weren't just beasts, they were weapons platforms. Some carried towers, called howdahs, holding archers or javelin throwers. Others were trained to trample formations, gore horses, or even pick up enemies with their trunks. The most famous use, Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants to invade Rome. A feat so bold, so absurd, it remains one of the greatest logistical gambits in military history. At the Battle of Heraclea, Pyrrhus of Epirus unleashed war elephants on Roman troops for the first time. The Romans broke ranks, horses panicked, soldiers fled. It worked until Rome adapted. But there was a terrifying flaw. Elephants are intelligent and easily frightened. Roman commanders began using fire, loud noises, and specially designed spears to frighten them. Some battles ended, not with elephants trampling the enemy thousands, but turning around and charging their own lines. The most horrifying twist. Some armies brought fire pigs. Yes, pigs soaked in tar and set ablaze, loosed under the elephants' feet. The squeals and fire sent elephants into uncontrollable stampedes. Imagine your war machine becoming your worst enemy because someone lit a pig on fire. Speaking of fire and terror, our next weapon didn't just burn, it burned on water, an unquenchable nightmare. At number 2, Greek fire, the weapon that burned on water. Imagine this, you're on a wooden ship in the Aegean Sea. It's a calm morning, until it isn't. The enemy approaches, not with arrows, not with catapults, but with flames that sail across the sea, stick to your ship, and won't go out. Your crew panics. Buckets of water do nothing. The fire hisses, climbs, swirls. The sea itself seems to be on fire. This isn't just an attack, it's a nightmare. The ancient world's version of napalm. Deadly, mysterious, and unstoppable. First unleashed by the Byzantines in the 7th century, Greek fire was more than just a weapon. It was military sorcery. It was projected from siphons, bronze tubes mounted on warships, and burst forth like a dragon's breath. Once lit, it clung to surfaces. Water didn't quench it. In fact, it seemed to burn brighter on water. Eyewitnesses described enemy sailors leaping overboard, only to find the sea itself aflame. Others said Greek fire made men combust like torches, and that its sound, a terrible whooshing roar, was enough to send entire fleets into retreat. The truth, we still don't know. The exact recipe for Greek fire was a tightly guarded military secret, passed down to only a handful of imperial chemists, and it was never written down. Historians and chemists have speculated. Maybe it was made from naphtha, pine resin, quicklime, or even petroleum. But no one can say for sure. Its formula was so secure, it disappeared entirely with the fall of Byzantium, vanishing like a magician's final trick. And that only added to the fear. If you were an enemy of the Byzantines, you weren't just facing fire. You were facing something you couldn't understand and couldn't escape. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, our ultimate weapon, not for its raw body count, but for its sheer, mind-bending psychological horror. The weapon that weaponized fear itself. Landing at number 1, war pigs. It began with a scream, not human, but worse, high-pitched, panicked, agonizing. Then came the smoke, then fire, and then chaos. Elephants, the tanks of the ancient world, recoiled in fear, charging back through their own armies, flattening everything in their path. Not because of swords, not because of arrows, but because of pigs, burning, screaming pigs. War pigs weren't created to kill directly, they were built to shatter nerves. Ancient armies, especially Rome and Greece, discovered that elephants, powerful, proud, and seemingly invincible, had one glaring weakness: sound. Not just any sound, the squealing of pigs. So generals drenched pigs in oil or pitch, set them ablaze, and released them beneath enemy elephants. The animals panicked. Commanders lost control. Lines collapsed, without a single sword swing. Pliny the Elder, Alien, Polybius. They all wrote about it, not as myth, but as military reality. Even cities like Megara reportedly kept pigs on standby, just in case elephants attacked during a siege. It wasn't the pigs themselves, it was what they did to the minds of soldiers. Uncontrollable fear, stampeding death, all unleashed by something no army would expect: a farm animal on fire. There were weapons that crushed. There were weapons that sliced. But this was a weapon that humiliated, a tactic so strange, so brutal, and so unthinkable, it became unforgettable. The concept alone feels insane, and it worked. Ancient warfare wasn't just about steel and strength, it was about imagination. The Khopesh curved to kill. Greek fire refused to die. Obsidian cut like silence. And sometimes, terror squealed. If there's one thing history teaches us, it's that fear has always been the sharpest blade. Because in the ancient world, the goal wasn't just to win, it was to break your enemy's spirit before the first blow was even struck. This has been long history short, your shortcut to the whole story. If these weapons blew your mind, subscribe for more bold cinematic history that doesn't just inform, it sticks. Hit the like button. Leave us a comment with the strangest weapon you've ever heard of.